I never expected my peaceful getaway would lead to this, a moment that defied everything I thought I knew about love and boundaries. As he leaned closer under the moonlit sky, his gaze intense and unrelenting, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in decades. This wasn't supposed to happen, not with him, not here. But as his hand brushed mine, I knew there was no turning back. I had always thought my life was settled, predictable, maybe even a bit dull. At 62, my days were spent between volunteering at the library, tending to my small garden, and occasionally catching up with old friends over tea. My children were grown, my husband had passed years ago, and I had made peace with the quiet rhythm of my life. But Claire, my lifelong friend, had other plans. At 65, she was as vibrant as ever, a whirlwind of energy in sneakers and colorful scarves, always seeking the next adventure. "You need to live a little, June," she'd say, her eyes twinkling with mischief. And as much as I resisted, she always managed to pull me along into her schemes. This time was no different. She showed up at my house unannounced, her car packed to the brim and her excitement spilling over. "We're going to a cabin by the lake," she declared, hands on her hips as if daring me to argue. "It's time for a change of scenery." At first, I resisted. The idea of leaving my comfortable bubble for an impromptu trip sounded exhausting. But Claire's persistence, as always, won me over. "Fine," I relented, with a sigh. "But no wild plans. I'm too old for your shenanigans." What she didn't tell me was that she had invited her much younger brother, Sam, to join us. I'd heard about Sam over the years, but had never met him. He was nearly 30 years my junior, a detail that seemed irrelevant until he stepped out of Claire's car the next morning. Sam was tall, with broad shoulders and a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space around him. His green eyes were piercing, holding a depth that made me feel both seen and exposed. I was struck by his presence, a strange mix of calm and intensity that left me unsettled. He extended a hand to me, his smile easy but warm. "It's nice to finally meet you, June," he said, his deep voice resonating in a way that lingered longer than it should. In that moment, I felt something stir within me, a faint, inexplicable spark I hadn't felt in years. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was nothing. But as the days unfolded, that spark grew into something impossible to ignore. The drive to the cabin was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had crept in when Sam extended his hand to me. His presence in the car, calm yet commanding, seemed to fill the small space. Every now and then, I caught his gaze in the rearview mirror, and each time, my stomach flipped in a way I couldn't explain. The cabin, nestled beside a serene lake and surrounded by towering pines, was as picturesque as Claire had promised. As we settled in, Sam effortlessly carried the heavy bags, his movements fluid and unhurried. I tried not to notice the way his shirt clung to his broad shoulders or the quiet confidence in his demeanor. He's just Claire's brother, I told myself. Nothing more. That first evening, we gathered by the fireplace, the soft glow of the flames casting shadows on the cabin walls. Claire regaled us with stories from her childhood, her laughter ringing out like a bell. I joined in, trying to focus on her words, but I was acutely aware of Sam sitting across from me. His gaze seemed to linger, intense and unwavering, as though he was studying me in a way no one had before. I brushed it off as my imagination. Surely, he wasn't looking at me that way. I was twice his age, a widow who had long accepted that her days of romantic intrigue were behind her. Still, every glance, every small interaction with Sam left me feeling strangely exposed, as though he could see parts of me I'd kept hidden even from myself. The tension between us grew in small, almost imperceptible moments. One afternoon, while Claire napped, Sam offered to help me collect firewood. We walked together through the woods, the quiet punctuated only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. I tried to keep the conversation light, asking him about his work and hobbies, but his answers were thoughtful, revealing a depth I hadn't expected. At one point, I tripped over a root, and Sam caught me instinctively, his hands firm on my arms. You okay? He asked, his voice low and full of concern. I nodded, but my pulse was racing. His touch lingered just a second too long before he let go, and I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. That evening, as we sat by the lake, the stillness of the water reflecting the silver light of the moon, Sam joined me on the porch. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, his voice breaking the silence. It is, I replied, my eyes fixed on the shimmering surface. But I could feel his gaze on me, and when I turned to meet it, the intensity in his eyes made my breath hitch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, as though an unspoken question hung there, waiting to be answered. You make it hard to look away, he said softly, almost to himself, before turning his gaze back to the lake. His words left me shaken, and I quickly excused myself, retreating to my room. As I lay in bed that night, my mind raced. Was I imagining things? Reading too much into his actions? Or was there truly something growing between us, something neither of us could deny? Over the next few days, the tension only deepened. Every glance, every touch, every shared moment felt heavier, laden with meaning I wasn't ready to confront. And yet, I couldn't help but be drawn to him, the quiet strength in his presence stirring emotions I thought I had buried long ago. The nights at the cabin grew colder, but the warmth between Sam and me was undeniable, even if unspoken. Claire, ever the lively force in any room, seemed blissfully unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. She went about her days with her usual enthusiasm, planning hikes and meals, leaving Sam and me in moments of unexpected solitude. One evening, Claire decided to turn in early, her exhaustion catching up with her after a long day. The cabin felt quieter without her laughter filling the spaces, the crackling fire the only sound. I stayed behind in the living room, wrapped in a shawl, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Sam joined me moments later, carrying 2 mugs of tea. Thought you might like this, he said, setting one on the table in front of me before settling into the armchair across from me. Thank you, I murmured, the gesture catching me off guard. It wasn't just the tea, it was the way he looked at me, his eyes soft yet piercing, as though he could see every thought I was trying to suppress. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of the fire wrapping around us. But the quiet felt heavy, laden with the weight of things unsaid. Finally, Sam broke it. You seem lost in thought, he said, his voice low and steady. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. It's just, being here has made me realize how long it's been since I've slowed down. I don't think I've let myself enjoy a moment like this in years. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. It's easy to forget how to feel when life gets in the way. But you deserve this, June. You deserve to feel alive. His words struck a chord deep within me, a vulnerability I wasn't prepared for. I looked away, staring into the fire, but I could feel his eyes on me. I'm not sure I even know what that means anymore, I admitted quietly. Maybe it's time you found out, he said, his voice softer now. No expectations, no pressure, just let yourself feel. I turned to him, my heart pounding. The way he spoke, the sincerity in his tone, left me breathless. Sam, I began, but the words faltered as he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. June, he interrupted gently, his eyes locking onto mine. There's something about you. From the moment I met you, I knew you were different. Special. I don't know how to explain it, but I can't ignore it. The air between us felt charged, the flickering firelight casting shadows that danced across his face. My breath caught as he stood, closing the small distance between us. He knelt beside my chair, his hand reaching for mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and yet it sent a thrill through me I hadn't felt in years. This isn't right, I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. We're from different worlds, different times. People wouldn't understand. I don't care what people think, he said firmly, his hand tightening around mine. All I care about is what you feel. what we feel. His words unraveled something within me, a knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for so long. Without thinking, I leaned closer, and in that moment, the world seemed to fall away. His lips met mine, tentative at first, as though seeking permission. But when I didn't pull away, the kiss deepened, a floodgate opening that neither of us could close. Time seemed to blur as the kiss continued, slow and deliberate, filled with a tenderness that made my chest ache. His hand moved to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing gently against my skin, while his other hand rested on my knee, grounding me in the moment. I felt the warmth of his breath, the steady rhythm of his heart beneath my palm as I rested my hand against his chest. When we finally pulled apart, my breath was ragged, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He didn't move far, his forehead resting against mine as his hands remained on me, steady and reassuring. I don't know what this means, I admitted, my voice trembling. I don't know where this leads. Neither do I, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I know I don't want this to end. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words settling over me. The rational part of me screamed that this was dangerous, foolish, that it could never work. But another part, the part that had been dormant for so long, begged me to let go, to embrace the feeling that had been reignited within me. For the rest of the night, we stayed close, speaking in hushed tones, sharing pieces of ourselves we hadn't revealed to anyone else. The fire burned low, but the warmth between us never faded. And as the hours stretched into dawn, I realized that no matter how complicated this was, I wasn't ready to let it go. The morning after that night by the fire, I woke with a mix of excitement and unease. The weight of what had happened between Sam and me was impossible to ignore, but so was the warmth that lingered from his touch, his words, his presence. As I made my way to the kitchen, I found him already there, pouring a cup of coffee. His smile was soft but steady, and for a moment, the world felt uncomplicated. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the same warmth from the night before. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded, unable to suppress a small smile. "Better than I have in years." Claire bustled in moments later, oblivious to the shift between us. She chatted animatedly about her plans for the day, a hike through the woods, a picnic by the lake, and I did my best to focus, but every glance at Sam felt like a secret shared between us, a quiet reminder of what had changed. The tension grew throughout the day, unspoken but palpable. Claire's endless energy meant she often left Sam and me alone, and while I relished those moments, they also heightened the intensity of what we were feeling. Each accidental touch, each lingering glance, felt like a spark waiting to ignite. It all came to a head that evening. Claire had gone to bed early again, leaving Sam and me by the fire. The silence between us was heavy, the unspoken questions weighing down the air. Finally, he broke it. "June, I can't keep pretending this is nothing," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know this is complicated, and I know it scares you. But I can't ignore how I feel." His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. My instinct was to retreat, to push him away, but I couldn't deny the truth in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice. "Sam, it's not simple," I said, my voice trembling. "What would Claire think? What would anyone think?" "I don't care what anyone thinks," he said, his tone firm. "All that matters to me is you." Before I could respond, a sound broke the moment, a creak from the hallway. My heart leapt into my throat as Claire stepped into the room, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. She wasn't angry, but her expression was sharp, probing. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone calm but direct. I froze, unsure how to respond. Sam, however, met her gaze without hesitation. "We were just talking," he said evenly, though his voice carried an undercurrent of resolve. Claire's eyes flicked between us, and for a moment, I thought she would push further. But instead, she gave a small, knowing smile. "Well, don't stay up too late," she said lightly before retreating to her room. The tension in the room remained thick even after she was gone. "I think she knows," I said quietly, my hands trembling in my lap. Sam reached for them, his touch grounding me. "And she didn't seem upset," he said softly. "Maybe she understands more than we think." But the truth was, Claire's reaction only added to my unease. The fear of discovery, of judgment, was too great. I pulled my hands away, standing abruptly. "I need to think," I said, my voice wavering. "I can't. I just need time." Sam didn't stop me as I retreated to my room, but the hurt in his eyes was unmistakable. That night, I lay awake, torn between the fear of what this meant and the undeniable pull I felt toward him. The next morning, the mood was different. Claire was quiet, her usual energy subdued, and Sam seemed distant, giving me space but never straying far. As we packed up to leave the cabin, the reality of returning to our lives loomed over us like a storm cloud. On the drive back, Claire finally spoke. "You know, June," she began, her tone measured, "life doesn't give us many chances to feel truly alive. When it does, you have to decide if it's worth the risk." Her words hung in the air, and I knew she wasn't just talking about life in general, she was talking about Sam and me. I wanted to respond, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stared out the window, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and longing. When we arrived back at my house, Sam lingered as Claire unpacked. He turned to me, his expression a mix of hope and resignation. "This doesn't have to be the end, June," he said quietly. "But it's your choice." I wanted to tell him how I felt, how much he had changed the way I saw myself and my life. But fear held me back, and I simply nodded, unable to meet his eyes. As they drove away, I felt an ache I hadn't expected, a sense of loss that cut deeper than I thought possible. For weeks, I carried that feeling with me, replaying every moment we had shared, every word he had said. It wasn't until Claire called me one evening that I found the courage to face the truth. "You miss him, don't you?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. "I do," I admitted, my voice breaking. "But it's so complicated, Claire. The age difference, what people will say." "June," she interrupted firmly, "the only thing that matters is how you feel. Don't let fear keep you from something that could make you happy." Her words gave me the push I needed. That night, I called Sam. When he answered, his voice was warm, filled with a quiet hope that made my heart swell. "I don't know where this leads," I said, my voice trembling. "But I want to find out." The relief in his voice was palpable. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said. "No pressure, no expectations. Just us." And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards. The path ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace the uncertainty, knowing I wasn't walking it alone. Returning to my routine after the cabin felt surreal, as though the world had shifted while everything around me remained unchanged. I'd spent years creating a life of quiet comfort, free from complication or risk, but Sam's presence had unearthed something I thought was long gone, a sense of vitality, of possibility. Yet, as the days passed, the weight of reality began to settle in. It wasn't just the age difference that gnawed at me, it was the ripple effect of our connection. Claire had been a steadfast friend for decades, and though her words on the drive back hinted at support, I feared what this might do to our friendship. Would she see me differently? Would she regret inviting me on that trip? And then there was the fear of judgment from others, my children, who saw me as their reliable, steadfast mother, my friends, who would surely whisper if they discovered I was entertaining the idea of a relationship with a man 30 years my junior. The fear of what others might think loomed over me like a dark cloud, threatening to extinguish the light Sam had reignited. Sam, for his part, was patient. He called often, his voice steady and reassuring, but he never pushed. "Take your time," he'd said during one of our conversations. "I'm here whenever you're ready." But readiness felt elusive. My nights were restless, my mind spinning with questions. Could I do this? Was I strong enough to face the inevitable criticism? And what if it didn't work? What if I risked everything, my friendships, my peace, only to find it was all for nothing? One afternoon, Claire stopped by unannounced, as she often did. She breezed into my kitchen, setting down a basket of fresh vegetables from her garden. "So," she said, her tone casual but her gaze sharp. "Have you spoken to Sam?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "We've talked," I admitted, busying myself with arranging the vegetables. "But I don't know what to do, Claire. It's all so complicated." Claire leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Is it? Or are you making it complicated because you're scared?" Her words stopped me in my tracks. "Of course I'm scared," I said, my voice trembling. "What will people say? What if it doesn't work? I could lose everything." "You could," she agreed, her tone softening. "But you could also gain something beautiful. Something real. And if I know Sam, and I do, is worth the risk." Her unwavering support brought tears to my eyes, and for the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that she was right. That night, I called Sam, and we arranged to meet. Seeing him again, standing there with that steady, patient smile, made my heart ache with a mix of longing and fear. Over the next few months, we navigated the complexities of our relationship together. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of awkwardness, as we tried to bridge the gap between our worlds. Introducing him to my children was the hardest part. They were polite, but I could see the questions in their eyes, the subtle disapproval in their stiff smiles. "It's just unexpected," my eldest daughter said during a quiet moment. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, my voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at me. "He makes me happy." It took time, but eventually, they began to see what I saw in Sam, his kindness, his steadiness, his unwavering respect for me. Slowly, the walls began to come down, and though the journey wasn't without its challenges, the love and understanding we built together made every struggle worth it. As for Claire, she remained my greatest ally. She offered her unwavering support, her knowing smiles, and her quiet reassurance whenever I faltered. "I always knew you had this in you," she said one day over tea, her eyes twinkling with pride. "It just took the right person to remind you." Looking back, I realized that the fallout I feared was less about what others might think and more about my own insecurities. Facing those fears head-on, with Sam by my side, taught me that life is too short to live for the expectations of others. It's messy, unpredictable, and often terrifying, but it's also breathtakingly beautiful when you allow yourself to truly live it. In the end, the greatest consequence of our relationship wasn't the whispers of judgment or the awkward adjustments, it was the profound way it changed me. Sam didn't just give me love, he gave me back a part of myself I thought I'd lost forever. Months turned into a year, and what began as an unexpected spark grew into a steady flame. Sam became more than just a partner, he became a part of my life, a source of strength and joy that I hadn't realized I was missing. The fears I once held, of judgment, of failure, of the unknown, slowly gave way to acceptance, both from those around me and within myself. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when doubt crept back in, especially when faced with curious glances or whispered comments from acquaintances. But each time, Sam's quiet confidence and unwavering support grounded me. "It's not about them," he would say, his green eyes locking onto mine with a conviction that left no room for uncertainty. "It's about us." Claire, ever the supportive friend, remained a steady presence through it all. Her ability to see past convention, to embrace life with open arms, inspired me to do the same. "You've earned this happiness, June," she told me one evening as we sipped tea on her porch. "Don't let anyone, not even yourself, take it away from you." As time passed, even my children began to accept the relationship. They saw how Sam treated me, how he respected me, how he brought out a side of me they hadn't seen in years. "He makes you happy," my youngest son admitted one day, his tone soft. "That's all that matters to me." But the greatest resolution came within myself. For so long, I had lived by the rules of what I thought I was supposed to do, putting others first, staying within the boundaries of what was deemed appropriate. Sam taught me that life doesn't have to follow a script, that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the greatest fulfillment. One crisp morning, as we stood by the lake that had started it all, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The water was still, the early light casting a golden hue over the surface, and Sam stood beside me, his hand warm in mine. "You've changed my life, you know," I said, my voice soft. He turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "And you've changed mine," he replied. "In ways I never thought possible." In that moment, I realized that love, true love, isn't about age, or circumstance, or what others might think. It's about connection, about finding someone who sees you for who you are and embraces every part of it. It's about taking risks, letting go of fear, and allowing yourself to feel. As we walked back to the cabin, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The world wasn't perfect, and neither was our journey, but it was ours. And that was enough. Looking back, I see now that life is far too short to be lived for others. It's messy, unpredictable, and often terrifying, but it's also breathtakingly beautiful when you allow yourself to embrace it fully. Sam wasn't just a chapter in my story, he was a reminder that it's never too late to start a new one. And so, as we move forward together, I carry that lesson with me. No matter what lies ahead, I know that I've found something worth fighting for, something real, something true. And for the first time in a long time, I feel truly, deeply alive. If you've ever faced a choice that felt impossible or found love in the most unexpected place, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Life is full of surprises, and your experiences might inspire someone else. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that dive into the complexities of love, life, and second chances. Join us next time for another unforgettable journey.